Hi everyone, thank you for joining our webinar this morning. I'm Anya, Marketing Manager at LaunchPad, and I'd like to start by giving a quick introduction to the webinar today. Before we start, there are a couple of housekeeping points to bring up. If you want to ask any questions during the webinar, please feel free to do so by using the chat function that you can find in the bottom right-hand corner of the GoToWebinar interface. We'll be recording the webinar, so we'll ensure this is sent over following the session so that you can watch back on demand. For those of you that don't know who LaunchPad and Arctic Shores are, LaunchPad started life as an on-demand video interviewing tool. Over the past 3 years, we've been expanding our offering to become an automation and video interviewing platform, helping organisations to hire higher quality candidates fast. The platform combines video interviewing, mobile technology, best-of-breed assessments, automation and machine learning to deliver an exceptional candidate and hiring manager experience. Arctic Shores designed game-based psychometric assessments with scientific rigour that deliver objectivity, accuracy and fairness to the recruitment sector. So, if we move on to the webinar topic itself, when we speak to clients, there are a number of frustrations that always come up. I'm sure it will come as no surprise that among the most popular are improving the candidate experience, improving recruitment efficiencies, and creating a fair and consistent process. In this webinar, Narinder Hammond, Partnership Director at LaunchPad, and Alastair Frater, Heads of Sales at Arctic Shores, will discuss how we can overcome these frustrations using the latest in recruitment technology. Without further ado, I'll pass over to Narinder.
Thanks, Anya. Welcome, everybody. So let's start by talking about the key frustrations that recruiters face trying to create a great candidate experience and how using the right technologies can help to overcome this. We know that recruiters are frustrated because some of the technologies that they have implemented over the years and are still using today are not really geared up to support the provision of an engaging candidate experience. Senior leaders know that candidate experience is an important element to achieve their strategic goals, but there is still a hesitation within those organisations and even HR service providers like RPOs to change, reverting back to that business as usual mentality. The question that needs to be carefully considered, I think, is why are we not treating our candidates like customers?
Morning, everyone. Narinder, I think you raised a good point, really. I mean, it's something that made a really big noise. Sorry, everyone. Your candidates are your clients. They're your brand advocates. They're your ambassadors. And I really think we need to stop treating them as a commodity and start treating them as what they essentially are, you know, the future of your business. And I heard somebody once could refer to candidates as consumers, so they blend that distinction between a candidate and a customer. Really, really important to consider with everything to do with candidate experience. You know, you want them to be having a great link to your EVP, all the things, the wonderful things organisations do. In fact, candidates can sometimes then be wrecked by bad experience during the kind of the consumer journey. So I think you may raise some good points there.
Yeah, thanks for that, Al. And interestingly, we conducted a major piece of research where we had mystery candidates applying for roles with over 100 organisations. And it was to help us to get a greater understanding of what candidates experience today. And our findings were really insightful. And I'd like to share this with our audience in a moment. But I wanted to emphasise the fact that candidate experience is really, really important to LaunchPad. One of Will, our CEO's main objectives when he created LaunchPad was to find a better way for candidates and organisations to engage with each other. Whatever solution we build for our customers ultimately become meaningless unless we understand what is important to our candidates, your consumer, today and tomorrow. So let's think about let's go back to our findings, and I'll just share a few with you if that's okay. So first one, the average time to respond to a candidate, whether they were successful or not, was 19 days. And remembering that candidates should be treated like customers, think about how this makes them feel about your organisation. Another one was 90% of companies still ask for a CV. So in all honesty, when you think of them as a consumer, what do you really need to know about them at this stage of the process? Do we really need them to go through unnecessary hoops at this stage of the process? 62% of companies had inconsistencies in their process.
Yeah, I think these two points are really quite interesting. So certainly on the CV front, we know that CVs are can be really unnecessary. They're not actually linked to success. I think it's quite commonly known now. But
Absolutely.
But yet it is a really easy, practical way for many people to do some screening. But it's a really bad way of doing that screening. So what other things can be done differently? And I guess that then links to this inconsistency piece. We all in life, I'm a psychologist by background. It's a sort of psychological tenet of everyone that you want to be treated fairly, and there has to be fair and certainly in an assessment process a consistent journey for everyone. You want to feel whether you've been judged equally to your peers or your rivals in an assessment process, perhaps. So making sure that the process is fair, equal, consistent is really, really important. And certainly we know that with some of our clients where they have had inconsistencies, real kind of key inconsistencies between different parts of the business, that can lead to some candidate issues. And we now know that with the prevalence of social media, that you are going to get people chatting, you are going to get people comparing their experiences and their stories, and with that then becomes some dissatisfaction around some of this inconsistency. So it's quite shocking that nearly 2/3 of companies do have this inconsistency in how they go out to market. Yeah,
I totally agree with you. I think the one I found most surprising as well, Al, was that 30% of companies didn't get back to candidates at all. And we had a quote from the quote I wanted to pick out was from a candidate that said it was really annoying and frustrating when I didn't get a response. Again, they're your consumer, they're your customer. So have they really bought? So what impact is that having in terms of how they've bought into your or not bought into your employer brand and ultimately your consumer brand? Yeah. So are you losing your next customer or even reducing your future pipeline of candidates? Either way, it's going to have an impact on your bottom line.
Well, we all know that frustration now that I think everyone suffers from with internet pages loading. So remember back in the day, I won't give away my age, but back in the day when things took an age to load, you kind of got it. Whereas now most people want instant kind of, now whether that's right or wrong is for another time. But if you don't get feedback quickly, you don't get something back from a process, that taps into that same psychological process of actually this is not fair. Why aren't I getting feedback? Why aren't I getting this thing? Why isn't the web page loading? So the fact that you don't hear from somebody, you're left in limbo. Limbo is one of the worst things for somebody to go through psychologically. A rejection is hard, it's tough to take, but it's better than not knowing. Mm-hmm. So it's again quite surprising that 1/3 of companies aren't providing this for their candidates.
I totally agree. So how can using technology help? I think one of the practical ways to improve candidate engagement is through automation. Having evolved our offering based on marketplace demand from candidates and recruiters, LaunchPad now builds automated solutions, which I'm conscious that some of our audience might already know, at the point of application through to the interview or even the offer stage, so that candidates can go through a process within a matter of hours or even 1 or 2 days maximum, whilst having a consumer grade experience. But one of the main fears that we hear from customers about automation, though, is that it's unengaging for candidates and they kind of miss that human contact. But I don't believe that. But I think the point is valid, but I just don't think it's true. Because if candidates are left hanging, surely it's better to automate a response than to leave them with a negative impression of your employer brand, which kind of goes back to what we just talked about now. It's not just simply about making the process quicker either. We can drip feed engaging video content throughout the end-to-end process to get candidates really bought into your brand and also the role itself. An example that comes to mind is a well-known cosmetics customer that we have at the moment that really made the most of the customization that we have in place and really kind of enriched their process by customizing video content and really helping to bring their employer brand and product brand to life. Feedback we had from candidates that whilst firstly they didn't realize that there was such a great company to work for, and they said that they would apply again, which is amazing if the right opportunity came up, even though they were unsuccessful at the time, which is the key point. So they were informed, they understood the brand better, and ultimately they would still wanted to apply again in the future. And having a fun, engaging experience, even though they're applying for a job, which we all kind of know is not the most exciting part of an application process. So putting all this into context, research shows that 80% of candidates wouldn't reapply if they didn't hear back from the employer. So engagement through automation, I think, actually becomes essential.
I think that's a really important point, Narinder. Just sorry to jump in. I don't know if you know this, the story behind like email marketing and John Lewis, right? John Lewis used to bombard people all the time, daily, sometimes twice a day with offers for whatever it might be. But they always said the key thing is have something new to say, have something important that the client wanted to see. So flipping this back to kind of marketing and consumers. Automation can be really good if you have something vital to say, if you have something important to say. So automation doesn't have to totally reinvent the wheel and be particularly amazing or clever, but what it has to do is speak to the candidate, tell them something, share something that is going to be of interest, and is going to do that thing of and I use this word deliberately, dragging them through the process. Yeah, make sure they stick in the process and are interested to hear what the next thing is that's coming.
Sure. But from your perspective, Al, what are your findings that you can share with the audience from a game-based assessment perspective?
Yeah, so we obviously bring an engaging aspect to selection to the market. So we have been around for 4 years or so, providing game-based assessments, and a lot of people think about game-based assessment and think about game, and we'll come back to that later on. But what we are providing really is very accessible assessments that are simple. They have simple instructions. They don't need prior knowledge to complete, so you get away with some of that fear around knowing things about mathematics, and we provide a series of tasks. They're like I say, they're game-based, neuroscience based tasks that really kind of level the playing field. And so we really are focused at Arctic Shores about trying to remove some of those candidate frustrations. So like I say, easily accessible, it works on mobile devices, they're mobile native, they're adaptive, it doesn't matter what screen you use, etc., simple instructions, all that sort of stuff. And the key thing that we do is we provide what we call subtle assessment. I'll come on to explain this chart in just a second. But what I mean by subtle assessment is people don't know that they're being assessed, or they certainly don't know what they're being assessed on. So that you automatically kind of remove a lot of that anxiety around, oh gosh, this is a maths test, or I've got to do certainly well on critical reasoning, or whatever it might be. There's no point worrying about it from a candidate's point of view. There's no second guessing. There's no stressing about it, like I say, because the instructions are pretty clear, and the experience is engaging. Yeah. And the chart that we've got on screen here is some research that we've done with a leading university, where we have compared people's perceptions between the game-based assessments that we provide and your traditional aptitude, cognitive heavy type tests. And you can see here quite clearly that a lot of people feel that actually doing these tests are far more relaxing. They're far less intimidating. We know from some of the studies we've done when we've hooked people up with stress measures like raised heart rate, that actually our tests are less stress inducing. So from a candidate, absolutely. So from a candidate experience point of view, a far greater experience, linking it back to kind of a duty of care to your consumers, your candidates. We know that we can do a good job in taking some of that stress out of the process, which I think is really, really important. Another frustration that we mentioned earlier is about not hearing anything. And I'm an occupational psychologist of long standing, and one of my gripes about what we do in the assessment space is not giving people timely feedback. Yeah, you've expected somebody to go through an assessment process. Now, whether that's a 3-hour grilling to get a CEO position, or whether it's a short, snappy assessment, or whether it's even uploading a CV, at some point they should get a return for the investment in time and effort that they've put in. And we're really passionate about that at Arctic Shores. So we give instant feedback. By the time you've closed down the game-based assessment and opened up your email client, you will have a feedback report from us. And it's very much positive psychology. The scores are removed. You can see here on the right-hand side, there is a line in the sand of where you sit on a trait. You're either more or less of something, but there's no numbers there. You're not celebrating being a 10 out of 10, because that's not necessarily good, or being a 1 out of 10 is not necessarily bad. So it really is about giving people instant, accessible feedback that they get, as I say, straight away. Why wouldn't you do that? And I think it's certainly more. We see more customers doing this now, but actually it's still lacking in quite a few places. So I would encourage listeners today to think about how they can incorporate timely feedback in an accessible way as well. So I guess to summarise, what we're trying to do at Arctic Shores is to bring a number of fairly simple innovations together in one place that really helps to alleviate some of this frustration. So make the assessment accessible, make it engaging, do things that it should just work. It should be like Apple stuff works, doesn't it, for the most part? Make it like that, and have this instant feedback. And if you want to make it branded, we'll talk about branding a little bit later on, I think, maybe, but certainly we can make these reports branded and all that sort of stuff.
Great, thanks for that, Al. So let's move on to another recruiter pain, that being trying to bring efficiencies into their overall process. So organisations that we work with and we talk to and our customers are telling us that they're having to manage challenges like just understanding that huge array of different providers out there in the marketplace and which ones to choose to make their process more efficient. It's a complex world of different providers, and it's like, who do we pick? And then trying to coordinate that internally, be it with HR or IT and procurement, as well as external factors like it might be that you're outsourcing your recruitment to an RPO. And how can we bring all these people together to advance that end-to-end recruitment process? And sadly, it's certain barriers like this that force organisations to end up staying with more traditional processes and feeling really frustrated that they're falling behind and they're losing candidates to their competitors, which I think must be so frustrating. And organisations know that if they can build seamless processes, candidates can find the process more engaging, quicker, efficient, as well as being kept informed throughout, as we've touched upon previously. Recruiters can manage their process in one place and feel that and free up their time to concentrate on value-add activities with candidates and with their key stakeholders in the business, which I think is essential. And this also means that they're able to manage their consolidated data, so MI, in one place, whilst improving time, cost, quality of hire, the usual suspects. At LaunchPad, we integrate with the best-of-breed providers, including Arctic Shores, who are one of our most recent integrations, hence why we wanted to have this webinar with you. And this allows us to build solutions for our customers who want a seamless process for their candidates and recruiters without the frustrations I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it's really exciting to be working with you guys, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. Efficiency is a double-edged sword. It should be efficient for the recruiters. Obviously, no one is going to sign up for a less efficient process, and that's certainly not what we're talking about today. But from a candidate point of view, we want them to have an efficient journey. We've mentioned all the frustrations. Certainly, a frustration is when things drag out, take too long. Are really cumbersome, it doesn't work, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, being efficient is really important. And I've said I'm an occupational psychologist, and I'm going to go on a mini rant here that people probably have heard me say before. But I want recruitment to be a really positive thing to do. And at the moment, a lot of recruitment is quite negative. It's focused on the rejection. It's focused on taking a long time. Sorry, there's a siren going on outside. Hopefully you can't hear that too much. It's making a decision about people quickly, timely, giving them that feedback, and then moving on to a point where you can spend lots of time with those candidates that are truly going to be a great fit for your organization. Those people that are going to be able to make you hit your organizational goals and grow your business. And focusing on that small population rather than wasting their time and your time on those people that truly are not going to be right. But the key thing with this is linking it back to making sure it's right. Yeah. So you need to make sure that we're absolutely looking at what is the successful thing. What are we absolutely needing to measure? And the slide here shows a whole host of ways of doing this, and what's right for one organization is not going to be right for another. But link it back to that job analysis of what defines good. And once you've got that, what defines good, how can you then go about measuring that in the most efficient, effective way?
Absolutely.
Rant over.
No, you said it really well. And to bring that to life, I wanted to share an example of one of our customers. So the Crown Prosecution Service had some real challenges with their graduate recruitment process, and they were obviously, with graduate, they're managing large volumes of candidates, but their process was really manual and lengthy, which meant that they were losing candidates along the way. Huge frustration trying to manage that. Having video assessments at the core, though, of their solution, they saw a 90% completion rate, as well as a marked improvement in the quality of hire, which ultimately meant they saw an increase by 19% of candidates recommended for appointment. I think that's pretty powerful. And another customer I can think of, so it's a global organisation who we work with in the United States. They were seeing huge reductions in time to hire from weeks to hours and days. The example I've got in my mind is that they had a 70-day time to hire, and we were able to reduce that down to 11 by automating the process. The cost implications were substantial. You can imagine when they're hiring thousands of people across the whole of North America, the impact of reducing your time to hire from 70 to 11 would have been a huge saving for them from a cost of resource perspective.
Absolutely. I think that the time to hire is a really interesting metric, and I think it's totally beholden on time to decision. So
yeah.
What I mean by that is that we increasingly see that we are certainly a lot of businesses are risk averse, and actually you want to make decisions using lots of data. By doing that, you are mitigating, you are minimizing the risk of making a bad hire. And we know that bad hires are incredibly costly. So depending on who you believe, it's anywhere between 4 and 20 times a starting salary having a bad hire. And that links to things like, training costs, recruitment fees, lost production, brand damage, lots of different things can contribute to that figure. So to mitigate making a bad hire, what do? You get lots of data, you take lots of time, you do lots of hurdles, lots of stages. And certainly traditionally, and the kind of if we were talking 20 years ago, recruitment process, that I would totally understand that, because actually a lot of the processes in place did have a lot of error in there, and actually took a lot of time to do. And so it comes back to defining what good looks like, and can you measure those things in a really quick way using technology and some of the things on screen here to help make that process quicker, that decision process quicker, but at the same time really focusing on the quality of hire. And I'm mindful of a client example we've got with Siemens, the German engineering business, and we've got some great feedback from them where they substituted out a different type of assessment for a game-based assessment that really did focus on looking at the key behaviors that were important for the role. And what they found is that their funnel totally changed shape. And actually the candidate journey meant that we could strip a lot of people out of the early stages, take less people through to assessment center, and actually they just had a lot less assessment centers. So they got a better caliber of hire quicker using less assessment centers. So it was a kind of a triple win, and ended up saving them quite a bit of recruitment budget.
Wow, that's great. That's really interesting, Al. That's a brilliant case study. I'm going back to the CPS. Despite them seeing a huge increase in volumes of candidates this year, in the last campaign compared to previous years, they were still able to reduce their time to hire by 21 days. I mean, 3 weeks is a hell of a lot of time to save on time to hire. But ultimately, it's that thing again, isn't it, where it's reducing costs in time and resource, and allowing recruiters to focus their energy on that more kind of value add.
Absolutely, and linking back to what I said earlier about the whole limbo thing, tell candidates, for the vast majority of organizations, that person recruiter, applying to you is applying to somebody else, and not just one,
of course,
maybe 10, 20, 30 different, depending if it's early career versus other things, but you have multiple applications out there, and let's be honest, folks, most people are not brand loyal to you to that degree that actually they might take the first job. And okay, they might then renege and go for you later on, but can you afford to take that risk?
Yeah.
So I think it's a really important thing. Yeah, reducing it down is really, really important. But it comes back to that, having faith in the data that you're able to make that decision with.
Yeah, for sure. Sure. Thanks for that, Al. Shall we move on to the last recruitment pain that we wanted to discuss with you, which I think will resonate with our audience, which is all about how they can create a fair and consistent process by reducing bias. Something, like I said, I hope will resonate. Al, what pushback do you get from organisations when it comes to bias management and game-based assessments?
Yeah, thanks, Narinder. It's one of the main things that people that come and talk to Arctic Shores about, and you may well be aware of the Amazon case study from a few weeks ago, where they were using an automated process. In this case, it was a fully AI system that was screening CVs, and the AI was doing a brilliant job, but the data that had been put into the process by a human being had caused it to go wrong and reject all of the female candidates from the process. So there is this concern around automated process being problematic, and that humans are better at making decisions. Now we know from the psychology world that humans are pretty bad at making decisions, and we make decisions based on all sorts of biases and issues. One of my favorite studies is about assessment centers, and you as an assessor are more likely to make a bad judgment about somebody if they are sat next to somebody that you don't like for whatever reason. And the study did this around weight, height, I think it even did hair color.
Oh gosh.
Just by association, you then mark somebody who sat next to somebody that you have a slight bias about. And so we know that humans are problematic in general when it comes to making decisions. So that they're humans. I would argue with this first point in some ways that actually humans are better at making decisions. I think people want to think that they are better at making decisions. Yeah. But what we would say at Arctic Shores is actually, you want to make sure that human beings are checking the automated system. Okay, and that's why we have a series, a whole team of dedicated occupational psychologists, making sure that we're doing that checking of the automation and the things behind the scenes. The second point is around about the game-based assessment, and some people in the marketplace and in the industry are saying, well, okay, it's just a game, and how can I get a decision based around human behavior off the back of a game? And I would agree with you. Off the back of a game, you can't. And our assessment is not a game. It's a series of neuroscience tasks that allow our customers, our clients, to do exactly that, to measure personality and cognitive traits. It isn't a game. We use elements of game technology, but that is absolutely really important in linking us onto the kind of the neuroscience. And this slide, don't be scared off by the pictures of brains, but this highlights how kind of some of the areas that we can assess in one of our levels of our game-based assessment. So we know from the world of neuroscience that the getting you to interact with these neuroscience tasks activates certain parts of the brain structure and the neural pathways within the brain structure. And these actions that we can directly observe in the app link back to this neural activity, which then links onto observable behavior, the observable behavior that you as a recruiter want to try and assess in the marketplace, in the workplace, to make sure that you are getting the right people in the right role. So it's impossible to accurately assess some traits that we measure, excuse me, without bias in other ways. So a good example of this is resilience. Okay, so one of the main things that early career recruiters ask for is a good measure of resilience. Okay. Other things might be emotional intelligence, drive, that sort of thing. But let's focus on resilience. How easy is it, Narinder, for you to say you're really resilient on a survey?
Very.
There you go. How accurate might that be? I won't get you to answer that. That's unfair. But it's one of those socially desirable things. Have you got a good sense of humor? Yes. Are you driven? Yes. Are you good with change? Yes, of course I am. And we actually know that most people aren't great with change. A lot of people aren't resilient. So how can you actually measure these with a survey? I would argue you can't.
I agree.
And actually, using these neuroscience tasks that we have, we can measure that. We put you in positions within the the game-based assessment, that we can look at your resilience, we can look at your emotional intelligence, we can look at when we start throwing change, and things like that in there. So it's a great way of measuring traits that are really hard to measure without bias elsewhere. The way that the neuroscience tasks build up as well is that we also make sure that it can't be cheated. So I would say, going back to this thing about bias and automation, if you have a task within the automated process that can accurately measure something and remove this bias, and I think bias is threefold really in this case. Bias comes from candidates perhaps deliberately saying they're resilient and saying that they are better at something than they might be, or they're unwittingly doing so. They think they're more resilient than they actually are. And then the third part of it is that assessor bias that I mentioned a minute ago about, does somebody actually, are they able to pick up on a sign of somebody being resilient or not? So we use this pre-validated set of assessments to build up a composite fit profile of this series of behaviors that then take that bias away from the assessor, because ultimately you end up with a single score that says this is somebody's overall suitability to progress them through to the next stage, whether that's a video interview or whether it's an assessment center or whatever it might be. But it's actually doing something without bias at that early stage.
That's really, really interesting. You've gone into the whole brains and neuroscience of it all, which is really, really insightful. But let me share some findings that we had from customers that we work with who use Verify, which is our bias management tool. And it'd be interesting to see if there's some kind of correlation between your findings and ours, Al. We see, so when we put Verify in place, we see clear patterns of behavior that are shown, but ultimately the tool is designed and works to eliminate that bias over time. And I won't go into that obviously on this session today. But key assessor behaviors we found were things like a clear pattern related to the time of day when you're reviewing candidates. Wow. So when you're reviewing candidates, just when you've reviewed them over a period of time and you're ready for a break, we saw that a marked dip in scores. On a 5-point scale, we saw a 0.7 dip around lunchtime, and we also saw a large dip towards the end of the day. You can kind of make as you will in terms of your view on that. We saw things like certain reviewers are typically very happy, positive reviewers. And again, if I stick to a 5-point scale, they're happily giving candidates 4s and 5s. But if you're slightly negative in your perception and your review process, you'd be potentially scoring the same candidate 2s and 3s. So that in itself is, if you're reviewing the same candidates, that in itself is biases creeping up very, very quick. Quite an obvious flag there. We also saw over a period of time, but be it days or weeks, if you're managing a recruitment campaign, reviewers became harsher with their scores over time. So they were calibrating as they were seeing more and more candidates. But I suppose in a simplistic way, if you're a negative reviewer and you're ready for a break and you're 3 months into a campaign, you're potentially screening the candidate out of the process for all the wrong reasons, all as a result of reviewer behavior.
Yeah.
And then we looked at Integrative Reliability, so looking at multiple reviewers reviewing the same candidates, and we saw a real variation in the differences in scores. But the biggest one for me, that in many cases, the difference, in many cases, actually had a difference in what the overall outcome was by over 20% in the assessment. So potentially over 20% of candidates were being screened out of the process for all the wrong reasons. Hence why we built tell us that and our customers have said themselves, the Verify tools help them to create a fairer and more consistent process by eliminating or reducing that unconscious or even conscious biases in that process. This means that the best fit candidates are shortlisted and hired based on individual merit as opposed to reviewer behaviour. And to kind of bring that to life, LaunchPad's platform has helped improve I keep using the CPS, but I think it's a really nice case study and really helps to bring this session to life for us. It's really helped to improve the Crown Prosecution's diversity in hiring. The rate of candidates declaring a disability recommended for appointment increased, and the rate of BAME candidates recommended for appointment is now higher than their civil service peers, and that was a quote from them. Also, our customers and partners tell us that Verify allows them to evidence that there is true rigour and quality assurance in their process, something that's really becoming a priority within recruitment processes. Are you finding the same thing, Al?
Yeah, totally. And I would recommend to our listeners that they ask those questions of their suppliers. That goes the same for us, for you guys, for anyone. Ask them about their track record with kind of fairness and rigor and quality assurance, and make sure that you're not biasing any one subgroup. I mean, great case study there from the CPS, and I think that just shows that we know that the assessment space has a lot of bias built into it historically, and there's no point getting morose about that. That's happened. But what can we do to change that?
Exactly.
And I think what you're saying about the some of these figures you had around assessors and some of their biases creeping in at certain parts of the day. I think that links nicely back to what I was saying about try and use that automation to reduce that. Okay, so can you get to a point where you don't have that tens, hundreds, thousands of people to manually review, because that's going to cause bias. We know that's going to cause you problems. So what can you do to get past that stage using some automation, using some great technology, and then do that positive thing that I mentioned earlier when I went on my mini rant, that actually spend really good quality time selling your business. An interview and an application process is a two-way thing. They should be make the latter stages of your assessment process the first real interactions with the business. Make them really excited about joining your firm, your organization, whatever it might be. That's a much, much better experience, a much better message to be sending out to people. And it will remove a lot of this bias and challenges and issues in doing so. So, I'm a big fan of automation.
I appreciate that, Al. I think we both know that we're both on the same page, and as organisations, in terms of if you don't remove those potential inconsistencies, those biases out of your process, any machine learning, automation, AI type technology that you put into your process, be that through LaunchPad, through any provider or Arctic Shores, unless you fix and normalize your behaviors and process and make your process best of breed, the automation piece will not be fit for purpose. So that's a key consideration. I think we should summarize. I'm conscious that I think we've covered off the three subjects quite well. So in terms of summary and some takeaways for you to consider, is when you're developing your candidate engagement strategy, always think of your candidates as consumers. I think that's something that's hopefully resonated, that's come across well in this session, and their expectations when going through the recruitment process. How can you give them feedback quicker? I mean, that's something that you went into a lot of detail about, Al, but I think it's so important.
I think it really is important. I think that set expectations really clearly before, during, and afterwards, and a great way of doing that and keeping them engaged is to give them as much feedback along the way as you can. Not always possible, but it should be possible most of the time.
I totally agree. How can technology and automation combined create efficiencies in your process and free up your recruiters' time to work on value-add activities, be that kind of high-touch engagement with your shortlisted candidates later on in the process, or working proactively with key stakeholders in the business to meet your recruitment goals? I mean, one of the challenges I think recruiters face is when they're managing volumes of candidates through the process and it's the same old process.
Yeah.
It would be so much more engaging for recruiters to use their expertise to really engage with candidates later on in the process and give that high-touch service to your consumers.
Absolutely.
And finally, look at your existing technology partner network to see which of them provide bias management solutions to help you hire the right candidates. If we can neutralize that behavior, as I mentioned before, then automation will fall into place a lot more naturally.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I really can't stress highly enough. Challenge your suppliers about how they cover off diversity and inclusion. Absolutely.
So we've spoken about a number of ways to alleviate your recruitment frustrations. I think there's one thing I wanted to say was that don't worry. Using new technology is a process of evolution, and that's something we stand really strong by with our customer base. We have customers who have gone on the journey with us as we've evolved our technology, and it should be a process of evolution and not something that's going to happen overnight. If you're not ready to make that giant leap in terms of fully automating your process or semi-automating your process, work with organizations that will allow you to evolve, that will allow you the flexibility to evolve over time.
Before we hand back to Anya, I think, or maybe it's you that's doing the questions, Narinder, I'm not sure. But I just say, my contact details are on the slides here. If anyone wants to email me and get a login to experience the game-based assessment, then please just email me and we can arrange for that to happen.
So we've had some questions coming through. Anya, do you want me to crack on and read some of these out? Okay. So the first one that was asked was, branding is really important to us. How flexible are your technologies to allow for customized branding? Do you want to start, Al?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this really links back to that candidate experience piece, doesn't it? And I think branding can, for some organizations, be incredibly important. So we do facilitate branding. That can be as simple as some light touch stuff on the reports and what have you, all the way through to fully customizable game-based assessments. So we've gone live recently with a couple of professional services businesses that have their own one, a couple of banks that we work with have their own app. So rather than searching for our app in the store, so it's the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, people go and look for your brand, and it's a great thing. But, all of the game-based assessments, you can have your logo in certain places, your color schemes all the way through. It can look and feel like your reception desk when people sort of arrive to start doing the assessment. So it does look really cool. We can't go mad. We have to make sure that the psychometric properties of the assessments stay true. So there are certain things we can do, certain things we can't do. But yeah, we often do brand them. And I think it's a really nice way of continuing that EVP, that attraction piece, so for certain clients. So yeah, how about you, Narinder?
So I think, as I touched upon earlier when I was mentioning the cosmetics brand, that whole rich content, video content that we can use to customize, and I'm talking specifically about the LaunchPad capability, is very much customizable. Tone of voice, all of those things, providing consistency throughout is really important in terms of making sure that the message is consistent with the first contact they have with that employer brand. But more importantly, we've been talking about automation throughout this session, and it's important for our listeners to understand that it's great that LaunchPad can customize, and it's great that Arctic Shores can customize, but ultimately that end-to-end process needs to feel like a candidate is going through various different technologies, but it feels like they're only going through one process, and it's slick. So that's really important, and that literally is the point of application form through to face-to-face or offer stage.
So we've had another question, which is for me, which is saying, going back to the pie chart that we showed about the how candidates preferred game-based assessment versus traditional tests. What are the demographics in that study? So thank you, Holly, for submitting that question. So I will answer it as best as I can. My understanding of that study is we basically survey everyone a lot of people that go through the game-based assessment. So that will be a range of different demographics. It will be different ages, gender, ethnicity, and we do have all of that split out. So I'll get your contact details off the back of this, and I'll send you a little bit more information around it, Holly. But what we do is we do track the different demographics all the time, because it's really important for us that this is fair for people. So we don't see any differences on all of the major protected demographic groups that you would expect to see. So age, ethnicity, gender, that sort of thing. We also don't see any difference in app performance or in assessment performance based on socioeconomic background either. What we do see, the only real difference we see is a slight decline in cognitive ability with age. And sadly to say, for me at least, because I'm getting old, is that your cognitive ability does start declining as you get a bit older. And we see the same decline in that anyone else sees in the assessment space. But like I say, I'll follow up after the session with you and send a little bit more detail. I think we have a question for Narinder.
We do. Thank you very much for your webinar. Really interesting. How would you counter the argument that video interviews are exasperating assessor bias? So I hope I touched upon it with regards to how we use Verify in our process. So Verify is a technology that sits behind the reviewer process. So when candidates are going, there's a lot more to it on the face of it, but I'm just going to summarise as best as I can, bearing in mind this is a webinar session, and I'd be really happy to pick up, Michael, with you later on if you would like. The bias management technology allows you in real time to look at, it brings up flags of potential biases being shown in the process, be that with gender. It could be that looking at the review criteria that you've created and the use of the different scoring levels that you can have within the process. It's whether there's consistencies that you're showing, and it also compares you to other reviewers who are also reviewing candidates. So if, for example, a flag shows that one reviewer is typically scoring males or females higher than another, it will flag that to you, and the system is designed to automatically reallocate that candidate to be re-reviewed by another reviewer, so that we can normalize it. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's always times when candidates typically have it may have been that those males or those females are naturally just better candidates and they've automatically scored, but that flag is so detail driven, it will pick that flag up and it will recognize that it needs to automatically be re-reviewed by another. And the feedback we get from our customers is that it's really help them to train their reviewers better, to help look at the potential biases. And the unconscious bias, that's the problem with unconscious bias. It's so unconscious you don't know you're doing it. And so training and helping eliminating that being in your process is really important. Consistency across reviewers, a calibration phase that needs to happen at the point of setting Verify up is very, very important too, to make sure that then the results are exceptionally accurate. I hope I've answered that for you, Michael, but if you want to discuss in more detail, really happy to do that. The question? Last question, I think. Okay. We have, there's one here that says, we have legacy technology that we can't change for the foreseeable future. How can I automate with what I have? That's a really interesting question, and that's actually something we see a lot when we're talking to our customers. Firstly, I think it depends on what your technology is that you're referring to. If you're referring to a potential ATS, for example, where it's been a global decision that's been made outside and locally, it's a potential challenge and it hasn't really been customized for your recruitment requirements. It's important to understand what its capabilities are. I think first of all is how much flexibility do you have to work without that ATS, for example? Can we build, or can you build automated solutions that don't actually require you to need the ATS? Because that's absolutely possible. But how can it be that you potentially build a standalone process, but ultimately the data is then driven back into the ATS? So what do you need to consider at that point? Does your ATS integrate? Does it integrate with assessment providers, with different? Is your ATS the center? Is that the hub of everything you do? And then you have offshoot technologies that then work within it. So it's things like that need to be considered. So integration capability is really important. How much data can be downloaded out of the ATS, and then how much data can be re-uploaded into the ATS? And that can be a huge challenge. And it tends to be the ATS that tends to be the biggest frustration, because we've seen that some ATSs in the marketplace have been designed to really manage candidates through a process as opposed to being highly engaging for candidates. And so if that's the case, that's absolutely fine. They should be able to integrate and find the right tools to make that process more wholesome for you. I hope I was able to answer that question.
Yeah, I think we've had another couple of questions, but I think time doesn't permit us to get back to them now. But we'll certainly follow up with the one or two that have come in outside of this.
That's great.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, Al.
No, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. This has been, as Anya's prompted at the beginning, this has been recorded, so we will make sure that we get this out to you. And any individual questions we will be sure to respond to personally. And of course, as Al said, we've got our contact details. You can find us very easily. I really appreciate your time, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.